Okay, so we're in Parshas Noach, page 31, in the Art Scroll Stone Chumash. And it begins, these are the offspring of Noach. Noach was a righteous man, perfect in his generation. Then it said Noach walked with God. Noach had begotten 3 sons, Shem, Cham, and Japheth. So the first real comment that Rashi makes here is, it says, these are the offspring of Noach, and then it goes on a tangent. It says, Noach was a righteous man, perfect in his generation. Noach walked with God. And then in verse 10, it says, Noach had begotten 3 sons, Shem, Cham, and Japheth. It talks about his descendants. So Rashi says 2 explanations for this. One is that we were heading in that direction of mentioning Noach's descendants, but once we said his name, we wanted to mention, we wanted to mention how he's a tzaddik and how he's righteous. That Rashi uses a term of zecher tzaddik levracha, that the mention of a tzaddik is a blessing. So we wanted to say good things about him when we said his name, and then we got back to the topic at hand. Another answer he gives is that what are a person's descendants? The descendants are what we leave behind in the world. And the Torah here is telling us that our main descendants are our good deeds. That the main thing that we leave behind in the world are the good deeds that we performed in the world. And our children and grandchildren are our descendants as well, but the main descendants are what we did. Okay. Another thing that it says here is that he was a righteous man, perfect in his generation. Sounds like a great endorsement, that he was righteous and perfect. But later on, and see how fast I can find it. I'm not sure how fast I could find it. For some reason, I didn't write where it is. Oh, it's in chapter 7, verse 1. That's on page 33. It says, Then Hashem said to Noach, come to the ark, you and all your household, for it is you that I have seen to be righteous before me in this generation. Notice, whereas by us, in the beginning of the Parsha, it says he's righteous, perfect in his generation. Here it just says he's righteous. It doesn't mention his perfection, that he's perfect. So the Chassam Sofer explains that, and Rav Shimon Schwab says something similar, and I guess I'll talk about both here. But he says something similar, that when it says that he was perfect, that means he had the perfect potential. But when we find later on, when Hashem comes to Avram and he says that that he was going to destroy the city of Sodom. So what happened? It says that Avram prayed for the city of Sodom and pleaded with Hashem to, if there are any righteous people in any of these cities, that they should not be destroyed. And because of that, and they were not saved, but Avram did pray for them. Whereas we don't find by Noach, it says that Hashem tells Noach that he's going to destroy the world, and Noach was like, okay. And he built his boat, and he saved himself, and he saved the world. He saved all the animals, or he saved every species of animal, but we don't find that he prayed to Hashem, he begged Hashem to save all the people. And because of that, he lost his title of perfect, that he didn't show concern for others. And Rav Shimon Schwab says a similar thing, not exactly the same, whereas some Sofer seem to understand that the problem that he demonstrated was that he didn't pray for the people. Rav Shimon Schwab says that he didn't bring any people closer to Hashem. That once again, in comparison to Abraham, the Torah says about Abraham that he was somebody who tried to bring whoever he came in contact with, he wanted to bring them closer to Hashem, closer to God. And Noach, we don't find this. It says that Noach had 120 years to build this teva, to build the ark. And in all that time, after all of that 120 years, who were the people that went into the ark? It was him and his family. It seems that he wasn't successful in reaching out to others and to save them as well. And because of that, he lost his title of perfection. And we might discuss this a little in a minute when we get more into the problem of that era. So it continues in verse 11 on page 31. Now the earth had become corrupt before God, and the earth had become filled with robbery. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupted, for all flesh had corrupted its way upon the earth. So first, that it became corrupt. What does that mean, that it became corrupt? So our sages say that means that it became corrupt through idolatry and through inappropriate relations. That means adultery and incest as well. And then it says that it was filled with robbery. So those are the two things that they were doing. And then in verse 12 it says, and God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupted. So that means, okay, and so he saw the earth would be corrupted, for all flesh has corrupted its way upon the earth. And in verse 13, God said to Noach, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with robbery through them, and behold, I'm about to destroy them from the earth. So he says, after the corruption, which we said meant idolatry and adultery and incest. So Hashem said he's destroying the world, not necessarily because of that, but the straw that broke the camel's back is the robbery. So why is that more important than the idolatry and immorality? So the Malvim explains that idolatry is bad and immorality is bad and it's destructive. But society could survive with it, meaning it doesn't necessarily destroy civilization. Whereas robbery, and our sages say the robbery in this case was that they would take whatever they could and get away with. So they would take, it says that everybody would take from others a very minute amount that they wouldn't be able to take them to court over such a minute amount. But at the end of the day, since everybody was doing it, people would be left with nothing, that everybody would come and take a small amount. And there was nothing that they had no recourse. There was nowhere that they could take them to get justice. And that's something that destroys society. It's impossible for like civilization to survive if people have no protection, if people have no respect for other people's property. And so because of that, because society couldn't survive, so Hashem said that he's going to destroy the world and start over again. Okay, it uses an interesting phrase here though in verse 12, and it says, and God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupted, for all flesh had corrupted its way upon the earth. So what does that mean, all flesh had corrupted its way? So our sages say that it wasn't just people who were immoral. Even the animals had become immoral. Even the animals, I say to say, were acting in an immoral fashion. And what does that mean when it comes to animals? It says that they were mating outside of their own species. And since people were committing incest and they were committing adultery, so so the animals were also immoral and were once again mating outside their species. The commentaries ask, so what does that mean? Animals don't have free choice. Why is that necessarily considered like destructive to the world if the animals are doing it? They're not they don't have any kind of choice. And our sages say that the animals are only doing it because the people are doing it, meaning that man is put in this world to really to perfect the world, and what we do has a tremendous spiritual effect and has tremendous spiritual implications. And it's not just to ourselves, but it's to the world as a whole. And if people are doing mitzvahs and people are doing the right thing, so that raises the world's spiritual level, and the world becomes a better place and a more spiritual place. But if people are sinning and people are ignoring their spiritual nature and are just following the physical, and so then the world becomes a less spiritual place, and it becomes immoral. The world itself, even the animal life, even the plant matter, even the air itself there's like a spirit of immorality in the world that affects everything around us. Okay, so Hashem says he's going to destroy them from the earth. So in verse 14, he tells him, make for yourself an ark of gopher wood, make the ark with compartments covered inside and out with pitch, and he gave him the dimensions. It's 3 stories, it says in verse 16. Okay, so The Ramban comments, we'll see in a minute, that he was to bring at least two of every species of animal, every land animal into the ark, which obviously would not fit into a boat of any dimensions. And so the Ramban comments that the dimensions, obviously, they have some spiritual significance, but the dimensions weren't the point. It wasn't built so big, so it would be able to contain all these animals, because no size could contain these animals. It was obviously miraculous that the animals could be in there. The point was really that he was following the word of Hashem, that Hashem commanded to do this, and that's what he did, and that's what it was all about. Okay, and it continues in verse 17 on page 33. And as for me, behold, I am about to bring the floodwaters upon the earth to destroy all flesh in which there is a breath of life from under the heavens. Everything that is in the earth shall expire. But I shall establish my covenant with you, meaning Hashem will protect him from the flood and protect him from people who may attack him. And protect him from people who may try to prevent him from going into the ark, who will be obviously angry once they see that the flood's coming and he's the one who has this boat. And also make sure that whatever produce he brings, the food that he brings into the ark, won't spoil. And you shall enter the ark, you, your sons, your wife, your sons' wives with you. And from all that lives in all flesh, two of each shall you bring into the ark to keep alive with you. They shall be male and female, meaning bring at least one male and one female of every species of animal. From each bird according to its kind, from each animal according to its kind, from each thing that creeps upon the ground according to its kind. Two of each shall come to you to keep alive. And as for you, take yourself of every food that is eaten and gather it into yourself. It shall be as food for you and for them. And Noach did according to everything that Hashem commanded him, so he did. So these were the instructions of Hashem, and Noach followed these instructions. So now, still on page 33, chapter 7. It continues. Then Hashem said to Noach, come to the ark, you and your household, for it is you that I have seen to be righteous before me in this generation. We spoke about this before. Of every clean animal, take unto you 7 pairs, a male with its mate, and of the animals that are not clean, that is not clean, 2, a male with its mate. Of the birds of the heavens also 7 pairs, male and female, to keep seed alive upon the face of the earth. Okay, so now it's clarified that he was to take at least two of every species, but of the clean animals, meaning the kosher animals, he was to take, it says 7 pairs. There's actually a question in the commentaries when it says, the article translates it 7 pairs. The Hebrew is literally, where is it? Shiva, 7. And there's a Sifsei Chachamim that actually understands the 7 means not 7 pairs, but 7 of each, meaning 7 of each species of animal. And that's how he understood that he was to bring them as offerings. The Sifsei Chachamim speaks out that there is a medrash that very clearly disagrees with that and says it's actually 7 pairs. And the Ramban also says that as well, that when it says 7, it means 7 pairs, meaning a total of 14 of each kosher animal. Okay, and then it continues in verse 4, for in 7 more days I will send rain upon the earth, 40 days and 40 nights, and I'll blot out all existence that I have made upon the face of the earth. And Noach did according to everything that Hashem had commanded him. So in verse 4 it says, for in 7 more days I will send rain upon the earth. Why 7 more days? So there's a medrash Rashi brings that it was really appropriate. That was really the time for the flood to start. But Methuselah, who was a very righteous man who lived a very long life, had just died, and this was his shiva. These 7 days were the 7 days of mourning for Methuselah. So in order to, so in his merit, Hashem gave 1 more week for them to be able to mourn him appropriately before bringing the flood.
Rabbi List.
Yes.
Going back to the kosher, how many people knew what was kosher and what wasn't? I mean,
that's actually a good question. Rashi brings there when it says to bring of the clean animals, Rashi says that we see that Noach studied the Torah, that Noach knew the Torah. But there are other commentaries say that either Hashem told him what species, and there are some commentaries that say, in fact, that they came themselves. So Hashem was telling him this is what's going to happen, but the animals came themselves to the ark. So 7 pairs of those kinds came, so he didn't have to know. But yes, the laws of kosher weren't given yet. So we hadn't received the Torah yet, but Rashi does say that we see that Noach studied Torah, that he knew what kosher was. David, you're muted. Okay. Then
How could he study Torah if the Torah hadn't been given yet?
that's a good question. So our sages say that the Torah was in existence from the beginning of time. And when we say that the Torah was given to there are lots of different approaches to what does it mean that the Torah was given to us, because the Torah was in existence even before the world was created, and when we received the Torah at Mount Sinai, we didn't receive the whole Torah. Or what I mean by that is that the Gemara says that there were other parts of the Torah that were actually given to us later when we were in the fields of Moab, immediately before we entered the land of Israel. So we didn't have a complete Torah scroll at that time. So what it means that the Torah was given to us at Mount Sinai, one approach is that means that the Rabbi Slatus, I think, spoke about this pretty recently, is that we were given the authority to interpret the Torah based on the rules of interpretation and how we understand the Torah, how mankind understands the Torah. That's the meaning of the Torah. Not how the angels would understand the Torah, but how man would understand. That's what it means the Torah was given to us. But the Torah was in existence. So Noach maybe would have been able to study the Torah, meaning, and also others understand that he was more spiritually sensitive, and therefore he was just able to understand things from seeing the world, the same way that our scientists could investigate the world and understand the physical properties and things through their investigations. So someone who is very spiritually sensitive could understand these things even without having the Torah actually given to them as a text. Just for their investigation of the spiritual world, they're spiritually sensitive, they would understand that there's some significance to kosher. Once again, we don't understand that, what the significance of an animal having split hooves and chewing its cud, but someone who is spiritually sensitive like Noah would be able to understand that these are clean animals. There's some spirit that other animals might be more spiritually damaging to soul. Okay, so continuing on, in verse 6, Noah, on page 33, Noah was 600 years old when the flood was water upon the earth. Noah with his sons, his wife, his sons' wives with him went into the ark because of the waters of the flood, of the clean animals, of the animal that is not clean, of the bird, and of everything that creeps on the earth. 2 by 2 they came to Noah into the ark, male and female, as God had commanded Noah. And it came to pass after the 7-day period that waters of the flood were upon the earth. So now the flood is there. And when Noah was 600 years old, it says in verse 11 on page 35, on the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains, in the second month, I'm saying, that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were open, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So we're being hit in both directions, that the water was flooding from below, and the underground water was coming up, and the water was raining from above. And this went on. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights. On that very day, Noach came with Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noach's sons with Noach's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them into the ark. They and every beast after its kind, every animal after its kind, every creeping thing, they went into the ark. So our sages comment in verse 13 that it says, Noach came with Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noach's sons with Noach's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them. So you notice that it segregates the men and the women. That it says Noach, Shem, Cham, and Yafet, so Noach's sons, with Noach's wives and 3 wives of his sons with him. So first it says the men, then it says the women. Instead of saying Noach and his wife and his son and his son's wives, which would be the more natural way. So our sages say that the entire time that they were in the ark, the husbands separated from their wives because it was a time of trouble for the world, that the world was being destroyed. And they were in their own little world where everything was fine, but on the outside, everybody was dying and the whole world was being destroyed. And at such a time, it's not an appropriate time for someone to have a grand old time on their own when other people are suffering. And because of that, the husbands and the wives were separated from each other during this time. And we'll see when they left the ark, Hashem commanded them to leave the ark. So in that there it says the men and the women together, because then they were permitted to each other again. Okay, so now in verse 17, when the flood was on the earth 40 days, the waters increased and raised the ark, so it was lifted upon the earth. Okay, and everything was killed. On page 37, verse 21, and all flesh that moved upon the earth expired, among the birds, the animals, the beasts, and all the creeping things that creep upon the earth, and all mankind, on whose nostrils was the breath of the spirit of life. Everything that was on dry land died. And he blotted out all existence that was on the face of the ground, from man to animals, to creeping things, and to the birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noach survived, and those with him in the ark. The water strengthened on the earth 150 days. So now in chapter 8, and Hashem remembered Noach and all the beasts and all the animals that were with him in the ark, and Hashem caused a spirit to pass over the earth, and the waters subsided. So what does it mean that Hashem remembered? That Hashem saw that when Hashem saw that they refrained from being with their wives, and not only that, it says that almost all the animals also refrained from their mates. And this time, once again, how people act affects the animal kingdom as well. So then the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep, the windows of the heavens were closed, and the rain from the heavens was restrained. The waters then receded from the earth, receded continuously, and the waters diminished at the end of 150 days. And the ark came to rest in the 7th month and the 17th day of the month upon the mountains of Ararat. The waters were continuously diminishing until the 10th month, and the 10th month and the 1st day of the month, the tops of the mountains became visible. So now the waters are finally receding. And in verse 6 on page 37, and it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noach opened the windows of the ark which he had made, and he sent out the raven. It kept going and returning until the waters dried from upon the earth. So this is an interesting case. I think the Malbim explains that with this raven, that it wasn't that he sent it out to see if there was, to see what it would do and to see where it went, to see, it was his messenger to find dry land. But he was using the raven for predicting, really, as a sign for the way things are, that the raven was seen as a magical creature, kind of, and they were able to predict how things were based on how it flew. But okay, that was the raven. But then in verse 8, it says he sent out the dove from him to see whether the waters have subsided from the face of the earth. But the dove could not find a resting place for the sole of its foot, and it returned to the ark, for water was upon the surface of the earth. So he put forth his hand and took it and brought him into the ark. And then on page 39, he did it again. And the dove came back with an olive leaf and a plucked with its bill. And Noach knew the waters had subsided from upon the earth. Okay, so then on page 39, verse 15, actually, I'll back up one, on verse 14. And in the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was fully dried. So finally, after a year, Noach was told to go out of the ark. So why did Noach wait for Hashem to command him to go out from the ark? Why couldn't he go right once he saw that the land was dry? So our sages say, I think it's the Ramban, says that the decree was that the world should be destroyed. And the ark didn't survive. They didn't survive in the ark because they were in a boat that was able to float. That wasn't the reason for their survival. That the reason for their survival was that there was a decree of destruction on the world, and they weren't in the world. The ark was considered by Hashem to be a whole different world. that what was happening on the outside was one thing, they were somewhere else. They were inside the ark, and that was a completely different world than the outside world. So Noach understood that just because there's no water there, there's no flood, that doesn't mean he's safe going out, because he doesn't know how long that decree lasts. So he was waiting to hear from Hashem. Once Hashem told him to go out, they went out. And in verse 15, it says, Hashem spoke to Noach, saying, "Go forth from the ark, you and your wife, your sons, and your sons' wives with you." So now, this is where we see, whereas before it says, you, your sons, your wife, your sons' wives, where it segregates the men and the women, here it says, in verse 16, you and your wife, your sons, and your sons' wives. So it puts the men and the women together to tell them that they're permitted to be intimate with each other again, that this decree is over, and now it's a new world. And in verse 17, every living being that is with you of all flesh, go out, let them teem on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So Noach went forth, his wives, his sons, his wives, his sons' wives with them, every living being, every creeping thing, every bird, everything that moves on the earth came out of the ark by their families. And Noach built an altar, and Hashem said in his heart, I will not continue to curse again the ground because of man, since the imagery of man is evil in his youth, nor will I again continue to smite every living being as I have done. So Hashem said that he would never destroy the entire world again like this. And on page 41, chapter 9, Hashem blessed Noach and his sons, and he said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the land. For fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every bird of the heaven, and everything that moves on the earth, and in all the fish of the sea in your hand they are giving. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you, like the green herbage. I have given you everything. But flesh with its soul, its blood, you shall not eat. And our sages interpret that to mean that you can't eat a meat while the animal's still alive. That's what this means. That flesh with its soul, its blood, you shall not eat means you're not allowed to eat meat of an animal while the animal's still alive. So it means that you can't chop off a leg off a living animal and eat that leg. You have to kill the animal first. However, your blood, which belongs to your souls, I will demand of every beast I will demand it, but of man, of every man for his brother, I will demand the souls of man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. From the image of God he made man. And you be fruitful and multiply, teem on the earth and multiply on it. So our sages say here that where it says in verse 3, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. So our sages say that this is the first time that they were allowed to eat meat at all. And before this point, we saw that Adam was told in the Garden of Eden that all the fruits of the trees were for him for food. And for all those 10 generations until Noah, so they were vegan, they were to be vegans or vegetarians, I don't know. But they didn't have a right to eat on the flesh of other living things. And at this point, because Noah spent this year supporting all the animals, all life was supported by Noah. So Noah was given permission and given a right to eat animals. This is when meat became permitted to man. So what was this flood all about, and what was Noah and the ark all about? So I mentioned that he wasn't saved because the boat was able to float. He was saved because he was in a different world than the rest of the world. That the world was being destroyed, he was somewhere else. He was in the ark, which was a whole different universe. But what was it all about? What was the point of it all? So some of the commentaries say that if we look at the underlying reason why the world was being destroyed, why was the flood being brought? So it was because it says Hashem told Noach he was destroying the world because it was filled with robbery. That means that people didn't respect other people's property. They didn't help other people. They were only concerned about themselves. So if someone else had something, if they wanted it, they took it. And they didn't see any kind of moral imperative of assisting other people and making other people be able to live. And we found that we saw that Noach had this flaw as well, like we saw from Shem and Schwab and the Chassam Sofer, that when Noach was told that the world was going to be destroyed and he should build this ark and be saved, so he said, okay. And we don't find that he prayed for anyone else, and he didn't save anyone else. He didn't bring anyone else closer to Hashem in a way that they would survive, except for his family. So he also had, on some level, had this flaw that he did not appropriately take care of, worry about others. So Noach, this entire time in the ark, what was he doing? The entire time in the ark, he was taking care of others. He was feeding the animals constantly. The Medrash said that he had blood coming out of his eyes from all the constant work of bringing food to every species of animal that were all in the ark. And this was in order to repair this flaw that the world had, and the new world could only be built on a foundation of chesed, of kindness, and concern for others, and concern for the needs of others. And once he spent a year doing this, once he spent a year being consumed by working for others instead of for himself, then they were able to go out and rebuild the world. Okay, and in verse 8 on the bottom of page 41, it says, and Hashem said to Noach and to his sons with him, saying, and as for me, behold, I established my covenant with you, on page 43, and with your offspring after you, and with every living being that is with you, with the birds and the animals, and with every beast of the land with you, of all that departed the ark, to every beast of the earth, and I will confirm my covenant with you. Never again shall the flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And Hashem said, this is the sign of the covenant that I give between me and you and every living being that is with you to generations forever. In verse 13, I have set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. It shall happen when I place a cloud over the earth, and the bow will be seen in the clouds. I will remember my covenant between me and you and every living being among all flesh, and the water shall never become a flood to destroy all flesh. So the Ramban comments on this, that and even in his day, he lived, I think, in the 1200s or so, that the Ramban said, we understand the way rainbows, a rainbow isn't just a spiritual phenomenon. Says they understood in those days already that the rainbow, that if you have a glass of water in certain ways, you have a prism, you could split light and make a rainbow. So he's saying that it's not just that Hashem, like when he's angry, he makes a rainbow out of nowhere, and that's a sign that he would destroy us, but not. He says that there's a symbol in the rainbow that's a reminder of not destroying, that's a covenant, that's a reminder of a covenant of not destroying man. And that is that when people are showing that they're making peace, that they're not threatening, one of the ways they would do it, especially someone who's armed, is they would turn their weapon around and point it at themselves. So if someone has a sword, they would hold it handle first towards the person opposite them to show them that they're not a threat. If someone has a gun, they would point the gun at them, point the gun at themselves with the handle towards someone else to show, look, I'm not a threat to you. It's not pointing at you. So he's saying that the meaning of the rainbow is that a bow, usually the curve would be towards a person you're shooting it at. But the rainbow the curve is towards the heaven. So, and that's an indication, just the fact that the rainbow is that shape is an indication that Hashem's not threatening us, that Hashem's not pointing his bow at us in a sense to destroy us. It's a reminder of a covenant that the arrows aren't coming our way from Hashem.
What about the St. Louis Ark?
At the end of this week's Parsha, we have the Tower of Babel, that people built to make war against Hashem.
Yes.
I hope the ark isn't a symbol of us building a bow pointing to heaven. It's not our Tower of Babel. Okay. What it really is the the gateway to the west, for those who aren't familiar. That arch symbolizes a gateway, and that's where Lewis and Clark left to go fill up the earth and conquer it, as we saw in this Parsha, to explore the west and eventually settle.
I did go
Okay,
to
so
the top.
what's that, Harry?
I did go up to the top when I was in St. Louis.
Oh yeah? Yeah, someday I have to take my family. I've been there plenty of times. Okay, so moving on. In verse 18 on page 43, the sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham being the father of Canaan. The three were the sons of Noah, and these the whole world was spread, and from these the whole world was spread out. It was Noah and his sons were the foundation that the world was built on. And the Malbim says about the three sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, that they represent the three different types of people that would ever be in the world. And those are, Shem represents the spiritual person, someone whose focus is on the spiritual. Ham represents a purely physical person, someone who there's no spiritual, is purely physical pursuits, a barbarian, someone whose only pursuits are physical. And Japheth represents someone who's neither, that he's not pursuing the spiritual, not pursuing the physical, but instead pursues the culture. You can, pursues philosophy and literature, and which they're not physical, but they're not spiritual either. They're kind of in between. And so that's like the Greeks were descendants of Japheth, that they had the Greek literature and the Greek culture, but it wasn't spiritual. They were actually pretty physical, but they weren't purely physical. There was a cultural, an art and element as well. Okay, so moving on in verse 20, on the bottom of page 43, Noach, the man of the earth, debased himself and he planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk, and he uncovered himself within his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers outside. And Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it upon their shoulders, and they walked backwards and covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned away, and they saw not their father's nakedness. And then in verse 24 on page 45, Noach awoke from his wine and realized what his small son had done to him, Ham. And he said, "Cursed is Canaan, a slave of slaves shall he be to his brothers." Canaan being a son of Ham. And Rashi says, quoting our sages, that he was the one who saw Noach at first and told his father. He was the instigator of this whole thing. So what exactly was it that Ham did? So from just the words of the Torah, it's just that he told them. But our sages say that Canaan actually did more than just tell them. That Canaan actually, there's one opinion is that he castrated his father, that he castrated Noach. And they say the reason why is because he was concerned that there's a new world now, and there are three people in the world. There's Noach and then his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So he was worried that his father would have more sons. And then they would have to split up the world into more pieces. There would be more pieces of pie and less for each of them. And because of that, Noah castrated his father to ensure that he wouldn't have any more children, and that his descendants would have 1/3 of the world. Okay, and he was cursed by Noah. And in verse 26, and Noah said, "Blessed is Hashem, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be a slave to them." And in verse 27, may Hashem extend Japheth, but he will dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be a slave to them. And Noach lived after the flood 350 years, and all the days of Noach were 950 years, and he died. Okay, so then it goes through the descendants of Noach, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the descendants of Japheth. And on page 47, just a few quick hitters. Verse 8 on page 47, and Cush begot Nimrod. He was the first to be a mighty man on earth. He was a mighty hunter before Hashem, and therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before Hashem. And then from the beginning of his kingdom was Bavel, Erech, Akkad, and Calnan, the land of Shinar. You hear like about Akkadians, that's the descendants of Akkad. And from the land of Ashur, the Syrians went forth and built Nineveh, Rehovos, Ir, Kala, and Resen between Nineveh and Kala, and that is a great city. So these are the descendants of Cush. Descendants of Ham are the Akkadians, the Assyrians, and those nations. Then in verse 13, and Mitzrayim begot Ludim, Ananim, Levanim, Naphthalim. Okay, so that's. And then in verse 21, it goes through the descendants of Shem. I actually might have made a mistake, because it says the beginning of Nimrod's kingdom was Bavel, Erech, Akkad, Kana, and the land of Shinar. But when it says the sons of Shem, it says Aram, Uz, Hul, Gesher, and Mash. I'm sorry, in verse 22, the sons of Shem were Elim, Ashur, Arpachshad, Lud, and Aram. That's actually the Ashur is Assyrians, which actually makes more sense now that I think about it, because they call Jews Semites. That's, anti-Semite, and anti-Semite is someone who hates the Jews. Semite is a word for a descendant of Shem. That we are descendants of Shem, we're Semites. But another of the Semitic languages is Aramaic, which is Aram, and that's from the same area as Asher, as the Assyrians. So we're saying here that the Assyrians were also descendants of Shem. Okay. So now skipping a little bit to chapter 11 on page 49. So it states, the whole earth was of one language and of common purpose. And it came to pass when they migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there, and they invented bricks. They discovered how to bake clay and harden it and make bricks and to make stronger buildings, more permanent buildings. And then they said in verse 4, and they said, come, let us build a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed upon the whole earth. And in verse 5, Hashem descended to look at the city and the tower which the sons of man built. And Hashem said, behold, they are one people with one language for all, and this they begin to do. And now should it not be withheld from them all that they propose to do? Come, let us descend there and confuse their language, and they shall not understand one another's language. So, what exactly were they doing? They wanted to build a tower with the top of its heavens and let us make a name for ourselves. So the Malbim understands that their intentions were to build a channels for the mazalas, for the constellations, the astrological signs, in a way that would channel their influence, so they'd be able to, to be successful really without God. They wanted to be successful without Hashem, and to use the astrological signs in idolatry. So Hashem said that they're all speaking the same language, they're all communicating with each other, and when you have bad people all together, things get very dangerous, and they really need to be separated and scattered in order that they're not together. That's just one of these big problems with the internet now, is that you have Facebook and whatever it is, the comment sections and YouTube and all these places, that you have all the Rishaim, all the wicked people from all over the world are able to get together all in one place. They're all talking to each other, and you have the people from Egypt and the people from China and the people from Australia and New Zealand and Europe, and Russians are all able to, all the destructive people from the entire world are able to communicate in the same place and cause trouble. So that was the case over here as well, that you had everybody from all around the world, all the troublemakers were able to get together, and that's dangerous. So Hashem said that we have to scatter them and make it that they can't communicate with each other. And in verse 8, and Hashem dispersed them from there over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it's called Bavel, because it was there that Hashem confused the language of the whole earth, and from there Hashem scattered them over the face of the whole earth. And then the Parsha on page 51 goes through the lineage of Abraham, how we get from Noach to Abraham, and there are 10 generations there. Then first there's Shem, and Shem had Arpachshad had Shelah had Aver had Peleg had Reu, and Reu had Serug, and Serug had Nachor, and Nachor had Terach, and Terach begot, in verse 26, when Terach lived 70 years, he begot Abraham, Nachor, and Haran. 1 second, let me just confuse. And Haran, yes. So so those are the 10 generations from Noach to Abraham. And then it continues in verse 26, I'm sorry, 27. Now these are the chronicles of Terach. Terach begot Abraham, Nachor, and Haran begot Lot. So Lot was a nephew of Abraham, a son of Abraham's brother. Haran died in the lifetime of Terach, his father, in his native land in Orkasdim. And Avram and Nachor took themselves wives. The name of Avram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nachor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Yiscah. And Sarai was barren; she has no child. Our sages say that that Sarai was also a daughter of Haran. So she was a niece of Avram. Avram had married his niece. And Terach took his son Avram on page 53, and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of Avram, and his son. And they departed with them from Ur-Kasdim to go to the land of Canaan. They arrived at Haran and they they arrived at Haran and they settled there. And the days of Terach were 205 years old, and Terach died in Haran. Okay, and that is the Parsha. Shkaya. Everybody have a great Shabbos.